Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Atlanta Council on International Relations webinar on the Air Force Global Strike Command's role in a changing strategic environment. I'd also like to welcome members of the Atlanta Consular Corps who have joined us today alphabetically: Dr. Swati Kulkarni, Consul General of India; Kwan Suk Lee, representing the Consulate of Korea; and Nadia Theodore, Consul General of Canada. We're delighted that you're able to join us today, and I sure hope I didn't miss anybody else from the Consular Corps. Today, as you know, it's our special pleasure to welcome our speaker, Lieutenant General Anthony J. Cotton, Deputy Commander of Air Force Global Strike Command. Air Force Global Strike Command is a major command of the United States Air Force, headquartered at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Strike Command provides combat-ready forces to conduct strategic deterrence and global strike operations in support of the United States Strategic Command and our combatant commanders. Air Force Global Strike Command is a direct descendant of our Cold War era Strategic Air Command, also known by many of you as SAC, and holds that lineage and history and the honors of SAC. For me, it's interesting to note that on the Global Strike Command's website, the mission video begins with comments by SAC's second Commander-in-Chief, Curtis LeMay. While I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy in the early 1960s, General LeMay was an occasional visitor when he was Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. His daughter Jane and son-in-law Jim Lodge, who was a pediatrician, were stationed at the Academy. Indeed, on one occasion, I had the opportunity to sit at a lunch table with General LeMay, and I might tell you that conversation was very animated and very informative. And I can tell you from that experience that Curtis LeMay was one tough hombre and really set the standard for a very efficient and effective strategic air command to confront the growing Soviet nuclear capabilities. General Cotton, I have some interesting vignettes from his visits to the Academy that I'd be happy to share with you sometime. Ladies and gentlemen, while you've had a chance to read General Cotton's biographical sketch, I'd like to highlight some of his background. Lieutenant General Cotton entered the Air Force in 1986, following a graduation with a degree in political science, good choice, General, from North Carolina State in Rolla. He later completed a master's degree in administration at Central Michigan University at Mount Pleasant. His long educational activities include a year at the U.S. Army War College, another good choice, and professional courses at Harvard. He has commanded at squadron, group, and wing levels, among other things. He has been a missile combat crew commander, a space surveillance crew commander, Deputy Director of the Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff's Executive Action Group, Senior Military Assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and Deputy Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. He also has been Vice Commander and Commander of the 341st Missile Wing at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, Commander of the 45th Space Wing and Director of the Eastern Range at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. And prior to his current assignment, Lieutenant General Cotton served as Commander and President of Air University, Air Education and Training Command, Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. General Cotton, you've pretty much done it all. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of members of ACIR and the strategic community here in Atlanta. And now over to you, General Cotton.
Hey, Bob, thanks so much. And yeah, it was really interesting being the commander of 20th Air Force and being able to look at the hero wall of the commanders there and seeing that Curtis LeMay was also the commander of 20th Air Force. You know, as you talk about Global Strike Command, what's pretty interesting about it, the two major numbered commands that are under Global Strike Command are really the impetus of the United States Air Force, because the mighty 8th, which was in Europe in World War II, and 20th Air Force that was in the Pacific, basically made up 1947, what we know as United States Air Force today. So what a proud heritage. But I think as we kind of go through today, and I describe to you, to the folks in the audience, and describe to you what Air Force Global Strike is, you'll see that for us old timers that understand what an Oldsmobile is, that this is not your daddy's Oldsmobile. That Global Strike Command, we love the heritage of Strategic Air Command, but we're more than that. And what I'd like to do is, if we can go ahead and start pushing the charts, I have my guys here that will do that. It looks like it's share first. All right, we're sharing charts here. Okay, Sherry, are you seeing the screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. So we can do the next chart. I think Bob hit it, and the topic of today's discussion, and having me represent General Ray, the commander of Global Strike Command, and really discussing and talking to you a little bit about what we do, and love to take questions afterwards. I think it's profound that we need to understand that we're in a time of transition. And in 2018, so the National Defense Strategy was a fundamental shift in how we were doing business in the past. The reemergence of a long-term strategic campaign reappeared for us, and a long-term strategic competition, long-term strategic competition from great power nations. The world's threat environment is getting more and more complex. I think everybody in the audience would agree to that. And what we bring to the fight at Air Force Global Strike Command, long-range strike capability, is absolutely crucial in getting after all of the what I would say tenets of what you're seeing in front of you, whether it's from the National Security Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review, the National Defense Strategy, or the National Military Strategy. We cannot do this as a nation, protect ourselves and our allies without long-range strike. If we can go to the next chart. So this time of transition continues. So we have endured a fundamental shift before, but the context has changed. I think it's more dynamic, and I think we're at higher stakes today. I think what everyone will probably agree to is galvanizing events unite us as a nation. Pearl Harbor, Cuban Missile Crisis, 9/11. But after the Cold War, I think the nation left the deterrence conversation. We've had 20 years of counterterrorism operations that was disconnected from strategic operations, albeit very, very important, but disconnected. I think counterterrorism is politically and strategically easier than dealing with what we're going up against today. I think it's a watershed event that this time is it's a wake-up call to understand that our adversaries, in particular China and Russia, have been watching over the past 20 years and have been at work. So our challenge is preparing for a new paradigm without a crisis while trying to avoid one. Think about that. I'd like to say that again. We are preparing for a new paradigm without a crisis, unlike counterterrorism, while trying to avoid one. So we really need the military and Washington to be on the same page, and it's more important than ever. Next chart, please. So how do we respond to this? So we must accept the reality of a new world context. Unilaterally drawdown of our nuclear capabilities would be absolutely unwise. While we've been postured to tackle violent extremism, we've had, like I said, adversaries that have been making moves. We know we need to modernize to combat this threat. Our adversaries have been. Replacing aging systems, not an arms race. Replacing aging systems is what we need to do. China and Russia has been doing it, and for the most part, they're already done. I heard a brief the other day. It was actually open press. It was Admiral Richard, who is a commander of, U.S. Strategic Command, and he was on a podcast with the Mitchell Institute. And by 2030, as most of you would say, hey, so as far as a nuclear threat, a nuclear adversary is Russia. By 2030, we fully expect that China could have the same amount of weapons that the Russians have. So what does that mean? That means that conversation that Bob and I were having before camera, when we were talking about strategic air command, when we were talking about not post-Cold War, but pre-Cold War, during the Cold War, that was one adversary that we're talking about. That was Russia, the former Soviet Union. Now the adversaries that we're going to have to deal with that has that capability, that's going to be that near peer, from a nuclear perspective as well, is not only Russia, but China. So when you hear about replacing aging systems, and we'll talk a little bit about the Minuteman III in particular, it's not an arms race. We're talking a one-for-one replacement on a system that was actually in its last developmental upgrade in the late 70s. So it's time to get to the 21st century on a capability. Next chart, please. So long-range strike works. Take a look at this chart, if you will, and what you'll see is there's one thing in common from this slide, and that every news article that you see on this slide is from foreign sources. And oh, by the way, this is during COVID. Every one of these articles are less than 6 months old. This was in the midst of a global pandemic, and long-range strike was still able to carry out its mission set. It shows that our strength and deterrent is visible to our allies, our partners, as well as our adversaries. And that's the way we want it to be. Next chart, please. So once again, projecting power during COVID. Let me talk about what we did in Air Force Global Strike Command as we were seeing what was happening across the world. So when it was clear that COVID was moving across the globe, we wanted to get in front of it. For a lot of our mission sets, we have 24/7 operations. It's a no-fail mission. We can't have folks become ill with the disease. So we went and got in front of it and was well prepared. So on the 22nd of January, the day after the first corona case was officially reported in the United States, Global Strike Command directed a review of our base disease, our major command disease containment plan. And we did a tabletop exercise. Days later, we were given daily virus briefings and putting together our own way to monitor health statistics. In February, we put in place plans for remote operations and teleworking. By the end of February, all of our bomber forces and missile wing forces were ordered to conduct tabletop exercises one final time to prepare for a potential of an extensive local outbreak. And it worked. So we were able to put everything in place. From that point, from February to this day, 24-hour operations, no degradation in mission. And as you can see, we're still deploying B-52s. We're still deploying, we still deploying our ICBM forces. We just had a operational test launch of ICBM a couple of days ago. You can see that we're also projecting power and working with our, our allies and partners in a lot of exercises in the Indo-PACOM region as well as the European theater. So all of this, I foot stomp, all of this happening through the COVID pandemic. Next chart, please. So how do we do that? So here's a snapshot of our weapon systems. We're responsible for 2 of the 3 legs of the nuclear triad. We own all of the bombers. We own all of the ICBM Minuteman III weapon systems. On the bottom, you see for security, we have a UH-1N fleet. And Bob, don't cheer that you're looking at something that's vintage Vietnam era. That provides security and convoy security operations for our nuclear assets in our northern tier bases. The top right is the E4B, 747-200. It's a National Airborne Operations Center. It does command and control in a nuclear environment, but it also does daily command and control operations on behalf of the President of the United States. So a multi-role platform for the E4B. We're also the lead command for the development of our nuclear command control and communications known as NC3 systems. And that is our nuclear readiness systems for communication with senior leadership when, you know, the darkest day, we want to make sure that we have comms with the President of the United States and are ready to execute our mission if we're told to do so. The venerable B-52, yes, I look on the flight line at Barksdale and I see tail numbers that are in 1960, 1961 vintage. I'll tell you though that as much as she's picked on for her age, what a venerable platform. And we'll talk a little bit about the re-engineering program that we have in store for her, as well as some other things that we want to do. But she's going to be around till 2050. Everyone jokes about that, but a venerable aircraft that will absolutely be able to do that. The B-2 Spirit, the stealth bomber, located at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, is going to be in inventory for the distant future until it's replaced by the B-21. And then on the bottom, we have our conventional platform, the B-1B. And the B-1B will be with us until the late 20s, early 30s, when it will be replaced by the B-21 as well. The B-21 is a nuclear and conventional capable bomber that's going to replace the B-2 and the B-1. Next chart, please. So like I said, the only leg of the triad that we're not responsible for is the sea leg with the with the Navy. We're the lead service for nuclear command and control and communications for U.S. Strategic Command. I am the Deputy Joint Forces Air Component Commander to the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, and General Ray, my boss, is the Joint Force Commander. And all things as the air component, we're responsible for all things Air Force and reporting to Admiral Chaz Richard, the commander of STRATCOM. Next chart, please. What people may not know is, as Bob described my assignments at the Cape and my DC assignments and a couple of assignments that I had in Colorado Springs, as you can see in that middle photo with the all-female B-52 crew, that's snow on the ground there. Our bases are, for the most part, located in northern tier areas of the United States. So what's really, really important for us are these three main areas: excellence, teams, and people. We need to make sure that our venerable systems that are out there are the best that they can be. We want to make sure that we have great integrated capabilities and are able to take care of our people that are really the front edge, the pointy edge of the spear, to ensure that all of those other critical missions can take place. I just look to the centerpiece, that picture of the crew in front of that B-52. That B-52 could be a brand new asset sitting there, but without people to operate it, it's just a piece of metal. So from my boss and the leadership team here in Global Strike Command, we know how important it is to ensure that we take care of our people and teams. And from that, we will drive excellence, because taking care of our people and teams will set a baseline of culture that we want, and for the people that deserve the utmost time from us to be able to provide them the services that they need, the care and feeding that they need, the proper equipment that they need to do the mission that the United States will ask of them. So next chart, please. So yes, venerable systems on the left-hand side. So we're going to sustain the old until the new arrives. So there you see the B-21, which will be the replacement for the B-2 and the B-1. We're improving our NC3 network currently. The bottom of the screen, you'll see the MH-139 Grey Wolf. That's our new acquisition for the replacement of the UH-1N Huey that's been in service with us since the mid-70s. The GBSD, ground-based strategic deterrence, we're still determining when we're going to do an official rollout on its name, but the program, that's what it's called right now, will be the replacement for the Minuteman III weapon system. And then the Alchem, the air-launched cruise missile, we have the long-range standoff weapon that will replace the Alchem. So yes, that portfolio is really, really full. A lot going on for the youngest command in the United States Air Force. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary, but a lot going on. And once again, I'll close the way I started. Air Force Global Strike Command is not your father's Oldsmobile. It's much, much more. And and our mission set is absolutely relevant and absolutely required in the world that we live in today. So Bob, with that, I think I'll stop there. And like I said, I'll end it on this chart here. It's about our people. And that lethality that we have and we cherish within Air Force Global Strike Command is because of the folks that you see on the screen.
Thank you very much, General Cotton. I'll turn it over to Tony, who's got some questions ready to go.
Got it.
Tony, if you will just unmute your mic and put up your video.
Good afternoon. I'd like to remind our audience that we'll be taking your questions in the order that they're received. In the interest of time, please keep them as succinct as possible. Also, be aware that we often receive questions in advance of the program. And as in past programs, I'll be inserting them from time to time to lend balance to the question stream. Welcome, General Cotton, please excuse me. I have the first question for you. How will hypersonic questions be integrated into Global Strike Command?
Hey, great question. And my staff said, hey, sir, you're off by a year. We're actually getting ready to celebrate our 11th anniversary tomorrow. Wow. So I am old. But Tony, to answer your question, and I didn't make reference to it. Hypersonics, I see that from our vantage point, we're probably the lead command on being able to provide operational hypersonic capability. Right, we have 2 platforms that can carry hypersonic weapons currently, and that's the B-1B and the B-52. So if you really put it in perspective on what hypersonics can bring to the fight, I honestly believe that we would be the first, if granted the opportunity to have a program where a hypersonic can be put on our weapon system that can hit IOC probably before our other services, before the ground system that the Army's doing and before the Navy system. So yes, I think that's part of that goes into the quiver. Strategic Command is probably going to be that COCOM that will be the driver for that, and we are the JFAC for Strategic Command. So it only makes sense that hypersonics would be something that would be in our portfolio.
Yes, and it's important that our audience know that both China and Russia are up to their eyeballs in development of hypersonics as well. So we're in a race with them, that's for sure.
But Tony, but you know, we're developing them as well. So and like I said, I think to have a long-range standoff air deliverable system that can do that for you gives a lot of benefits to to decision makers on what kind of platform you want to put that on. Over.
The next question is the U.S. thinking regarding the need for low-yield nuclear weapons that Moscow, Beijing will use low-yield nuclear weapons only if the U.S. has none? Or does the U.S. believe it will lose a conflict with Russia, China, if those countries have low-yield nuclear weapons, but the U.S. has none?
Yeah, for that one, I tell you, that's more of a policy question than anything else, as far as, from my perspective here, as a war fighter in JFAC. Now I'll leave that up to the policymakers to make that determination. As you know, our planning processes would incorporate and take into consideration what we think is what the adversary is more likely to use, and if that was the case, we would plan appropriately.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from the Korean consulate. Question from Kwang Sook Lee at the Korean consulate in Atlanta. GSC launched an unarmed Minuteman III equipped with 3 test reentry vehicles on August 4th. To my understanding, the Minuteman III currently is deployed with a single warhead because of the New START, because of the restrictions under the New START Treaty. But the New START Treaty may or may not expire next February. And if that happens, do you think the GSC would like to have the option to deploy 3 warheads instead of 1? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the question. So it's kind of interesting, right? It's what goes around comes around. When I was a wing commander at Malmstrom Air Force Base, we were the last, as we were preparing for start, we were the last wing to take our triples off to get to a single warhead. So he's absolutely right. That test launch a couple of days ago had 3 test articles on it. The treaty allows us to, at least in a test for testing, to make sure that we can ensure that the capability still exists as we do flight testing for the system. So in this case, the launch was one where we wanted to make sure that that capability still exists for the Minuteman III weapon system.
All right, the next question, sir. On July 2019, Air Force Vice Chief of Staff, General Stephen Wilson, predicted that our new B-21 stealth bomber will be operational in about 863 days. Are you satisfied with Northrop Grumman's progress in developing the B-21? And why is it so important that the B-21 become operational as soon as possible?
So great question. So I concur with the vice chief. Matter of fact, we're quite proud of the work that's being done by Northrop Grumman, and we're quite proud in seeing that our programs are we use the term laying flat, that things are going as predicted. So to answer that second part of that question on are we ready to start seeing those tails on the flight line? Absolutely. Remember, I opened up and described the B-21. The B-21 is a dual-use aircraft. It is it's going to be, it has a conventional role as well as a nuclear role, and it will be actually replacing two tails as it replaces the B-2 as well as the B-1. So the quicker we can get her, on the flight line, the quicker we can get those 21st century technology on the flight line, the better for us. We're really, really impressed with like I said, with the work that's being done. We're not anticipating any delays thus far.
Will the B-21 carry as much ordnance as the B-1 and B-2, if I may ask?
Well, that's, I'm not prepared. We can't talk about that right now. We're not,
Okay.
but she's going to do pretty good.
Okay, that's good enough. Next question. To deal with the uprising threat of China, what preparation does the U.S. do? What area will be the target place to expand the defense of U.S. to China's threat?
So I think, I think we've been looking at that for a while now, right? So it probably, I recall you used to hear the conversation of the pivot, right? So the pivot to the Pacific, which actually predates this administration. So from our perspective at Global Strike Command, collaboration and the way we have joint exercises with Indo-PACOM and the way we have joint exercises with PAC-AF, I think is critical. I know that the consulate from South Korea is online. So those relationships are critical in that region, right? Having joint exercises with our partners is critical in that region. So for us, what I think is unique is long-range strike assets don't necessarily have to be based in theater, right? And I think that is, so from our perspective, we love that because what we can do is we call them CONUS to CONUS missions. We can actually have a bomber arrive and have, two Korean fighters escort on its wingtip for an exercise there in the peninsula. She can drop down, refuel at Guam if required, but really doesn't have to, and head back home, right? That's that unpredictability that we like, right? Because the adversary doesn't know that all of a sudden there might be a B-2 showing up or B-1 showing up or B-52 showing up, whether it's a 1, 2, or 3 ship, right? But what it does, I think it puts our allies at ease that are in the region because, they can form up like we've had done. Like I said, once again, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, it was amazing to watch. And do joint exercises, and then our guys can come back home. So I think that unpredictability for China and for Russia is we make money off of that in Global Strike Command from our long range strike capabilities. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, that was a brilliant strategy to create. There's no question about that. Having your your bombers pulsing like that, with 4 or 5 bombers coming in at irregular times, staying at irregular time frames, And it certainly has to have our adversaries thinking twice about what we're doing. I have an additional question here, if I may. At this time, are we facing any shortfall in the Air Force's capacity to provide heavy airlift for rapid deployment?
Are you talking about from my perspective, when we're talking heavy lift, are we talking transportation from Air Mobility Command, or are we talking bomber, forces?
Yeah, I think they're probably talking airlift outside of your box, but they're assuming that you obviously know what the status is. I suspect that's what.
Well, I would love to have more bombers. I would love to have more, tankers. I would love to have more airlift. So.
Yeah. Also, I think it's fair to point out that the Chinese have become quite aware of that combination and are now seeking to mirror that same combination for themselves. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and that's, and I think that's an important comment, Tony. When we really have this dialogue and understanding, where China is, where Russia is, in regards of looking, modeling, think about this. Global reach was really an American paradigm, right? So when we talked about global reach, when we talked about, tanker bridges, when we talk about C5s, C-141s that are now C-17s, and that ability to deliver product forward, even our allies and coalition partners don't do that. General Ray is quick to mention, and rightly so. We have the only bombers for our allies and partners. The United States owns them all. There are no bombers anywhere else. There are no ICBMs anywhere else, right? So that is something that other nations have fighters. Other nations can have that kind of up close and personal type, but long range strike for our allies and partners is unique to the capabilities that we have in the United States. So you're absolutely right. So I think our adversaries are looking to say, man, how does the United States have that global reach capability, right? So it's pretty easy. We have it in textbooks. I was the Air University commander. You can just see what we did. It goes all the way back to the to the C-54s dropping airlift during the blockades. So it's something that's unique that we used to take credit for being unique as a United States modeling capability, but now we have adversaries that are trying to mimic it. Over.
Yeah. It also says, it does say something about their cyber capacity and their espionage as well. That has helped them to leapfrog the way they have, saving billions for them and costly time that we have put into those structures that they've been able to instantly, in the last couple of decades, catch up to.
Well, and their population doesn't necessarily have a vote.
Next question. Former Defense Secretary Perry has advocated a change to the current presidential nuclear release policy. Specifically, nuclear launch decisions should not be in the hands of just the president without some review. What are your thoughts on this matter?
I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole.
Or 20 foot.
That's a policy conversation. And yeah, that's well above my pay grade.
Okay. We have something that is more germane to you. Coming from Global Atlanta, one of our outstanding magazines throughout the American Southeast, they often partner with us. Related to the China question, how important is a presence in the Southeast Asia arena, particularly around the South China Sea, and what does the AFGSC's operations imperatives look like there?
Well, you want to continue to have the ability to have open sea lanes for trade, right? I mean, I think when you look at the Straits of Malacca and you go way down in the South China Sea areas and those things, our partners and allies tend to worry that China will continue to creep and try to take control of those sea lanes and say that those are their waters instead of international waters. Our role in that is, once again, like I said, is the ability to provide for Pacific Command and Pacific Air Forces the ability to have a long-range strike capability if required by those combatant commanders in that region, to support and aid, if required, our allies and partners.
The next question. In a recent interview, Admiral James Stavridis stated that prior to any Air Force deep penetration, Virginia-class submarines should be expected to move in first with stealth capabilities and neutralize standoff missiles and missile threats before air assets are unleashed. Is this an accurate analysis to confront Chinese hostilities?
Yeah, I think getting rid of the threat prior to having our forces come in, whatever plans dictate and how that would happen, and that's as you mentioned, that would be a joint plan that would ensure that that would happen, whether or not it's a naval asset or whether or not it's an Air Force asset, or even potentially in the future a long range Army asset. I think the plans will dictate how that would be in the future.
Yeah. We know the Virginia-class submarine has an incredible set of ordnance in there and could certainly help clear the way for you folks, that's for sure. And
Yes,
we
absolutely
have
true.
at least one question from some squids out there. We have to keep them happy as well, correct? The next question. When the Reuters report was breaking about the delivery of its first long-range anti-ship missiles in decades, the official Chinese response was to warn Washington to, and I quote, "Stop flexing its military muscles around China," unquote. As a commander receiving such new ordnance, what goes through your mind when you hear this and similar veiled threats from Beijing?
Well, if you kind of think about the capability, why build the capability, right? So from a commander's perspective, now I see that as a potential threat. So I mean, I don't know how you would want me to take that as a commander that is looking at an adversary that has an advanced weapon that would have that type of capability. So I think like any other commander, you see it as a new potential weapon, a new potential threat, against the United States, its allies and partners.
Yes, and your only option, of course, is to smile and be ready. Yes. The next question.
And we are.
Yes, sir. The next question is, 2 years ago, the RAM report suggested that the PLAAF is seeking to expand the size of its Air Force to a point where our Air Force will hesitate to challenge it. Does the Air Force concur with this analysis? And if so, does it have a working counter strategy that can be shared with us today?
Well, I'll leave you with this. Will they probably grow the Air Force? There's nothing that lends me to believe that they won't. Will we ever cower to the fact that they are growing the Air Force? Absolutely not.
The next question is, sir, half a dozen years ago, United States Air Force Chief of Staff Mark Welsh stressed the importance for integrating air power capabilities within and across air, space, and cyberspace to successfully fulfill its various missions. Can you report today that there's been movement towards implementing that plan?
Yeah, so the good news is that's underway currently. And we have this, we have a program across the department that's known as Joint All-Domain Command and Control System. JADC2 is what you'll hear the folks call it. And that's exactly what it does. To be frank, I give a lot of that credit to our now former Chief of Staff, Chief Goldfein, for pushing that across the finish line to ensure that all services are using that as a baseline. But that's exactly what that is intended to do. It's a collaboration C2 methodology, and we're really excited about that. So the answer to that question is yes. Something that General Welch, who I worked for, was talking about. Something that then his vice chief was General Goldfein, became the chief and became a top priority for the United States Air Force, and has expanded across the department.
Our next question. Can you explain China's strategic strike capabilities and intentions?
I wish I could, but no, I can't. Sorry.
Well, there is a suggestion, of course, and I think that was related to the previous or recent question about their massing air capacity and, of course, naval capacity in an effort to intimidate us to the point where we will either withdraw or not do anything at all. And neither of those are options, as you know. Andersen Air Force Base on the island of Guam has thousands of military personnel and the capacity to service hundreds of warplanes. Admiral Phil Davidson recently voiced a concern about Guam's vulnerability to a Chinese missile attack. Is the island now protected by the Aegis missile and or Patriot defense system? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so that would have to be a question that Pacific Command would have to answer, since that's their AOR. I'm a tenant that would fly into the area with a B-52, B-2, or B-1, but the 36th wing belongs to PACAF, Pacific Air Forces, which reports to Admiral Davidson. So as far as the defense of that island, I would say, I'd ask that question of them.
Yes, you're just looking for safe runways to touch down on, to take off from. I think we've had something similar to this mentioned earlier, but I will just give it to you nevertheless, and you can answer it as quickly as you wish to. The Chinese PLAAF gives every indication that it's been mirroring our strategic intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, strategic airlift, and strike assets. Would it be fair to assume that your command is prepared to challenge those enemy assets, or is it a threat assigned to other Air Force assets to confront?
Well, we all have a part in that, right, for protection. So I could say that we have a role as well in Global Strike Command, as well as other commands. Once again, because it's all based on what region we're in. So if we're in Europe, it would be European Command as the COCOM commander, the combatant commander. The air component of that would be the U.S. Air Forces Europe, that would have their hand in offering that protection. And for the Pacific Theater, that would be the Indo-Pacific Command with Admiral Davidson, as you previously mentioned, and its air component, JFAC, would be Pacific Air Forces that would provide those services. Remember, they have in their islands forward. In Hawaii, for example, there's fighters that are there. In the peninsula, there's fighters. In Japan, there's fighters. So there's, that would offer that capability for us, as well as, what you would bring back from CONUS. Over.
Here's a question that's going to strike at a topic that you may not have mentioned, and I know you'll have something to say about that. How does Global Strike Command stand with funding specifically dedicated to preventing mishaps, whether equipment failure or, for example, consumer drones flying into Global Command aircraft?
Yeah, so not unlike any other command across the Department of Defense, we have a counter UAS strategy. We're looking into all those type of capabilities that can provide protection for our assets, home and abroad. As far as funding, you can always use more money, but we're doing pretty well in the funding realm as well for some of for most of our programs. So I think we're attacking both of those issues that the question that the person that asked that question, I think we're attacking both of those in a fairly rigorous manner.
Yeah. This question relates to nuclear capabilities. The days of the fixed base ICBM are limited, and thus the ICBM should be eliminated from our arsenal of retaliatory forces. What is the case that can be made for retaining ICBMs in the U.S. arsenal of deterrent forces? Is there a case to be made?
Absolutely. So what Admiral Richard will tell you is if you take one leg of the triad out, regardless of what leg that is, it opens up vulnerabilities for him as far as planning and what capabilities he now has or does not have. I'll go one step further. We used to brief this. So the adversary has to individually target for each one of the ICBMs that are in the missile fields today. If you eliminate the ICBMs, you have actually made it easier for the adversary because their targeting is now shrunk to, instead of 500 and 500 plus targets, now it's down to like 7. So there is, I think the biggest one that I would say is the ICBM has a role to play in the triad. It opens up a vulnerability to our adversaries that we would lose if you get rid of that piece of the triad. Yeah, not because I'm wearing a missile badge. That's just the facts, the facts of the matter. So as Admiral Richard states, he loses a capability. He loses an opportunity when he loses any of the 3 legs of the triad. So it absolutely is still relevant today.
General, we have about a dozen more questions to ask. We've only got 5 minutes. Here's a challenge for you. If you can answer this one in a relatively short time, maybe we can squeeze one last question in as well. Russia and China held the first joint exercises in July 2019, featuring strategic bombers like the Tu-95 and the H-6. It was unprecedented joint exercises over the coast of South Korea and Japan. What's your take on this?
So I have a mentor that used to tell me, the United States has allies and partners. Russia and China are transactional. And to me, that exercise was a transactional exercise. And I'll leave it at that.
I have to quietly agree, sir. General Cotton, it's been an honor and a pleasure to really have you on the ACIR Zoom webinar programming. From this ground pounder to you and your command, I wish you fair skies, as well as the hope that you never have to use the destructive forces entrusted to you by this nation. I'll now turn you over to the U.S. Air Force Academy graduate, former fighter jockey who fell in love with the A-10 and the F-4. Dr. Kennedy, he's all yours.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Tony and General Cotton. Great pleasure to have you join us today. On behalf of all of our members and their guests, I want to thank you for taking the time that you have and all your very thoughtful and very frank commentary in response to many of the questions that were asked. I particularly was pleased to see that you've noted the importance and the impact on your command of the great power competition, as well as the importance of modernizing our forces. I appreciated your commentary about the Triad, particularly because I personally agree with that, the complexity of targeting all three forces simultaneously and preventing at least one force from retaliating very effectively against any adversary is severely compounded by having that extra leg, the ICBM force, even though technically it becomes more vulnerable than some of our other forces. It has clearly been a pleasure to have you with us. We're delighted you could join us. And one last commentary to our guests. For those of you who have also joined us today, for your own safety and health and the health of others, please continue to wear your masks, practice social distancing in all public places and elsewhere as is appropriate. We are indeed facing a severe crisis in this country, a humanitarian crisis of human health and a danger to our own economy. And you truly, as the president suggested, are a patriot if you practice social distancing and wear a mask. So this is a real crisis, not a fabrication. Please do your part to help our enemy, COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We wish you a healthy and happy rest of the week. And from Atlanta and ACIR, good afternoon to all of you.